Welcome, my friends, to the Sage of Quay Radio Hour, your home for free and critical thinking. And I'm your host, Mike Williams. Tonight, my very special guest is Clare Swinney. Clare is an alternative researcher and activist out of New Zealand. The focus of her research and activism is geoengineering. She is the purveyor of the very informative and popular website, Northland New Zealand Chemtrails Watch. To start our conversation, I was very interested in how Clare became involved in her geoengineering research, and here is what she had to say.
In about 2006, I was sent a DVD with over 24 hours of documentaries, and one of them was Aerosol Crimes by Clifford Carnicom. And I watched it a few times and I thought, this is a bit strange, but I could see that it had the potential. The technology had the potential to be quite dangerous to humanity. And in early 2010, I noticed aerosol trails starting to appear in Northland, New Zealand. This is where I live. And so I started keeping a record because of what Clifford Carnicom had recorded. He had noted that the sighting of the aerosol trails also, it coincided with severe droughts. And so I was waiting for the drought, and sure enough, we had a very severe drought here. It was the worst drought that we'd had in Northland in decades. And also, as well as the aerosol trails, we started seeing strange cloud formations, another indicator that weather modification technology was being used. Like, for example, perfect circular imprints in the clouds, ripple formations, and we saw straight lines in clouds. So it became apparent that weather modification technology had been implemented not long after the Copenhagen summit in December 2009 failed. It was more or less 2 weeks after that. Then we started to see the sky filling up with this material. And so I thought, well, it's important to keep a record of what's going on here. This is a crime that's been committed. So I started a website called Northern New Zealand Chemtrails Watch, and it's grown from just getting the odd bit of information, the odd person who's interested in what's going on. The website probably gets about 600 hits a day, which compared to Geoengineering Watch will not be very much at all. But for Northern New Zealand, we've only got a small population. I think that's pretty good, and more people seem to be aware of what's going on and contributing, sending photos.
Well, that's interesting because you mentioned the cloud formations, and to fast forward a little bit, recently NASA released a new cloud chart. Did you hear about this?
Yes, and I noticed here there's a guide that was put out for children called the Kiwi Kids Guide to Clouds, and in that they included pictures of chemtrails.
Mm-hmm.
And they labelled them cirrostratus clouds. And this brochure was put out by NASA, the Royal Society, and the Ministry of Education. So who's involved in covering it up? NASA, the Royal Society, and the Ministry of Education.
Yep, that sounds like the same brochure, Clare.
Yeah, this one was for the New Zealand children, but same program of brainwashing.
Yeah, because it made its way here too into the States.
Yeah, on a government-sponsored channel, TVNZ, see chemtrails being presented as normal clouds regularly. Like, for example, I understand the day before yesterday, during the 6 o'clock news, a chemtrail was shown and it was described as being normal cloud. And last week there was a chemtrail shown and it was described as a feather cloud. It was actually an aerosol trail that was dispersing. There appears to be a program of deliberate brainwashing going on, which is quite worrying, really.
To add to what you're saying, Clare, they've added the chemtrails to children's movies, advertisements, billboards, magazine ads. The weather reports, as you mentioned, you'll see the weatherman come on TV, and behind him is a screen, and he's giving you the weather, and we'll see the aerosol spraying lines behind him. And he never makes mention of it. It's just there. And by doing this, the person that is watching is conditioned to believe that these are normal cloud formations and that this is a normal looking sky.
Yeah, and I noticed that Microsoft products include quite a lot of chemtrails. So people are staring at their laptops, oblivious to the fact that they're being brainwashed while they're using their computers. I think XP includes screensavers that have got pictures of chemtrails on them, and also Windows 7 that's got some things that look like chemtrails, yeah, stylized.
And what we're calling out is there is a concerted effort to condition the masses through propaganda and covert means.
Right. When you see it during the weather programs, during the 6 o'clock news, and you've got a weather presenter saying that this aerosol trail, well, he doesn't say it's an aerosol trail, he'll say it's a feather cloud. And they're deliberately going out of their way to invest this energy into making things that are new to New Zealand. I mean, we didn't start seeing chemtrails regularly until early 2010.
That's when you started seeing them regularly?
Yeah.
We had a head start on you, I think.
When did you start seeing them, Mike?
I want to say that I started becoming aware of them around 10 years ago, but not to the magnitude and the volume that we see them today. Here where I live, there is almost not a day that doesn't go by where they're not spraying. And the planes come from the south and they fly north, and south of us is a military base, it's Fort Bragg. So, short of me driving down there and watching airplanes take off at Fort Bragg, I have to assume that, and of course, anybody listening, it is an assumption, that they're most likely flying out of that military base. Because it's very consistent. They come from the same direction, they head north, they fan out, but they always have the same point of origin. So it's very, very interesting.
And what you say is backed up by what Kristen Megan said about seeing the large volumes of aluminium and barium on the Air Force base she was working at.
Yeah, I tried to get Kristen on the show. I reached out to her, but I haven't heard back from her yet. So hopefully I can get her because I would love to talk to her about that.
We're quite lucky to have someone that's come out that is an insider because it's so rare that you do get someone. It's such a secretive program, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Think about it. Nobody has really leaked anything. I mean, I don't even know really of any pilots that have come out and said, yes, I dispersed this.
No. Dr. Deagle mentioned that he was treating pilots who were involved in the spraying, and he said that they were told that it was to do with saving us from man-made global warming. I did talk to a lady who had spoken to a whistleblower, and he was a very elderly man, he's now deceased, and he said that they were involved in this activity in the early 1930s, according to this gentleman, and he said that they were very interested in the weather, and they had been for a long time. And she said that while I was talking to him, he burst into tears, and she said that she got the impression he was crying because there was so much he did know, but he couldn't talk about it because of the confidentiality agreements they sign into in the Air Force, which is, I understand, one of the most highly classified areas of work in the military.
I struggle with people who know what they're doing. Many of them have to know that what they're doing is not a good thing. Because people say to me, well, Mike, how do you know it's not a good thing? I said, look, if it was something that was good for humanity, they would be plastering that all over the place. We would be hearing about that 24 hours, 7 days a week. But the fact that they absolutely say nothing and they go into denial, I mean, I don't know. You have to use your head. You have to come to reason that it's not a good thing. Because if it were a good thing, they would tell you, this is a good thing that we're doing. But we never hear that.
No. And actually, I think it's a bit disturbing how many of the scientists working on geoengineering have either worked or collaborated with the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, the Cold War Weapons Facility. And among the prominent ones, Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb. And interestingly, Teller was involved with the Manhattan Project. That employed 130,000, and that was kept secret like the chemtrails program. And Lowell Wood, Edward Teller's protege, he's worked at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab for 4 decades now, and he's been one of the Pentagon's top weaponeers. He's described to as the go-to guy for weapons development. He had the idea, according to Rolling Stone magazine, of dispersing particles out of a high-altitude aircraft, reputedly to deal with global warming. I mean, climate engineering is obviously just another form of weapons research when you look at what's actually going on.
Claire, what would you say are the primary reasons as to why they are spraying?
Well, given the serious drought that's occurring in California at the moment, and evidence in the satellite imagery to show that the weather is being engineered and very aggressively. And also here, I checked the satellite imagery over New Zealand, and I can see in the areas where there's a drought, like for example in the west of Northland and the Waikato, you can see engineering going on. You can see the aerosol trails, and also I see circular imprints. It's a larger circle with a smaller one inside it. And I see the same imprints in the satellite imagery over the US. Also clouds with right angles and straight lines in clouds. So I'm seeing the same imprints I see in your satellite imagery. The primary reason they are spraying is for weather modification purposes, and it's been used to create extremes in weather. And I think there's at least two reasons for that. One is to create food shortages, and the other is to create the impression that we have so-called man-made global warming, climate change. If you have a look at the things that the people involved in pushing the theory of man-made global warming are saying, you'll see a pattern. Like, for example, Connie Hedegaard, UE Climate Commissioner, was quoted as saying, we can choose to believe that Superstorm Sandy and the most severe drought in decades, she was talking about the drought in California, and the worst wildfires some states in the US have ever seen, were all just a freak coincidence, or we can choose to believe in the overwhelming judgment of science before it's too late. And also, Christiana Figueres, UN climate chief, said earlier this month that devastating extreme weather, including recent flooding in England and the US being hit by a polar vortex, have a silver lining as it's boosted global warming to the highest level of politics. And she said the very strange weather experienced across the world in the last 2 years was a sign we are experiencing climate change. There was also Cherry, the head of the UN's climate science panel. He told The Guardian earlier this month that the extreme weather seen around the globe is only going to get worse. And he referred to the heaviest rainfall seen in 200 years, floods and gales in the UK. And he said that was a foretaste of what's to come in a warming world, even though his statements defy logic because there hasn't been any global warming for at least 17 years and 6 months. And I think it's, as Orwell said, his political language is designed to make lies sound truthful, murder respectable, and to give the appearance of solidity to pure wind. We see the weather extremes in New Zealand being used by NIWA, that's the National Institute of Water and Atmospheric Research. It's a Crown-owned research facility. It's already got a bad record. I mean, the criminals, they've been exposed, like those involved in ClimateGate, for engaging in climate data adjustments to make it look as if we had global warming in New Zealand when there was no warming trend at all. So I don't even know why news media is turning to these people for more information, because it's already been shown that they are working to a political agenda. They're not genuine scientists. And interestingly, NIWA has provided cover to account for the severe droughts that we've been having as a result of the chemtrailing and weather modification technology that we can see being used. And as I mentioned, you can see it quite clearly in the satellite imagery, clouds with right angles, circular imprints in clouds, numerous aerosol trails, gigantic gravity waves, which would require the presence of severe thunderstorms in natural circumstances, but now they're evident regularly. NIWA provides satellite imagery on their website, and I see a note that says that they also process it. So it makes me wonder what they could be hiding. For example, with the circular imprints, when they become too obvious, it will be, I suppose, in their favour to conceal what's going on.
And they'll show you everything as long as they believe that most of the population doesn't understand or is ignorant to what it is they're being shown. Because the trick of their trade, and I'm talking about the elites and the globalists for those who are wondering who they are, is they hide in plain sight. And they talk very openly about the things that they're doing. It's just many people are oblivious to what it is that they're talking about or who these groups are, and they don't read their white papers or their strategy papers, many coming out of the United Nations. So it's very interesting, and you mentioned, Claire, about the weather extremes. We have the same thing here. Over the last 2 weeks here in North Carolina, we've had days where it was 70, 75 degrees, and then the next day it's 45 degrees or it's 50 degrees. And then it would swing back to 60 degrees the next day, and then it would dip down back to 40, 45 degrees. So we had this roller coaster going.
Goodness.
And it's becoming more and more common now to have these types of temperature swings going on, where one night it might be 30 degrees at night, because North Carolina is not a cold state. And then we've had some nights where, the temperatures dropped into the teens and into the low 20s. This is not normal weather for North Carolina. I've lived here for 20 years, and as I mentioned before, I would say probably over the last 5 years or so, I have seen a tremendous uptick in the amount of spraying that they're doing, and it's definitely altering the weather. And I have to laugh when they talk about man-made climate change, because the people who are making the man-made climate change are the people that have decided to geoengineer the planet and the people who have decided to sit in the aircraft and push the spray buttons. So it is man-made, but it's not you, it's not me. Okay, so it's very interesting how they kind of play that piece of it. It's they talk about being man-made. Yes, it is man-made, but it's not man-made in the sense that they're trying to convince the public it is. That it's something that you and I or the population is doing. They're doing it.
Yeah, I found a study in Scientific American. It was March 2011, and it was a repeat of studies that had been done in 98 and 2000, and it was titled Flood Experience Boosts Climate Change Acceptance. And it mentioned that those who directly experience flooding, in other words, an extreme weather event, are more likely to be worried about climate change. And it mentioned researchers at 2 British universities based their findings on 1,822 across the UK and reported that those who'd experienced flooding exhibited a greater willingness to save energy to mitigate climate change. And they also indicated that they believed that their behaviour was affecting climate change. And it mentioned that following the failed climate negotiations in Copenhagen, the prospects for sufficient public concern about climate change and willingness to reduce carbon emissions seemed dim, but this study's findings provided a glimmer of hope that tipping point social dynamics might exist in the domain of climate change. So there you have a reason in that study for why they would be creating these extremes, because they know that people are more willing to buy into man-made global warming, man-made climate change. Now we've got another severe drought in the west of Northland. It was officially declared a few days ago, and also in the Waikato. And interestingly, an organisation, as I mentioned, NIWA, which has already been exposed for engaging in criminal behaviour that was to do with climate data adjustments. They were exposed in 2010. They had a story on the mainstream media. For example, there was an article in a major New Zealand newspaper called the Dominion Post. That article was titled North Island Drought Worst in History. This is last year on the 10th of March. And it was just after we'd had a very severe drought in the North Island. And it referred to NIWA. Their models suggest by the mid-century, farmers in most North Island regions, as well as in eastern regions of the South Island, will be spending 5 to 10% more time of the year in drought. And in my opinion, the severe droughts that we've had since early 2010 at least have been man-made. And I've emailed one of the top scientists at NIWA, that was a few weeks ago, Dr. Olaf Morgenstern, and he, according to the NIWA website, is involved in making, quote, high-quality measurements in atmospheric conditions. And I thought that he might know about the aluminium, barium, the strontium, the aerosols, which are obviously being used for weather modification purposes. And I mentioned to him that I found the pH of the rain to be 6.8 when it should be 5.7. Unpolluted rainwater should have a pH of 5.7, which is what you would expect in this part of the world. New Zealand is a very clean, relatively clean country. Well, it was before the aerosol spraying started. And the 6.8 was found also by Francis Mangles repeatedly after several days after heavy spraying in California. And he said he's done over 500 rainwater tests now. And I've just started, and the first test I did, it was 6.8. And at the moment, we've got a manufactured drought occurring about an hour's drive away to the west, and often the clouds come over, they float over from the west to here. So it's of no surprise that the pH of the rain would be 6.8. So anyway, I asked him if he was keeping a check on the air constituents associated with, I called it aerosol geoengineering. And if he wasn't, why not, given that evidence shows that the aerosols are poisoning the environment and being used for weather modification / geoengineering activities. And he replied on the 9th of February that they weren't taking any measurements of the pH of the rainwater or the composition of it. And he couldn't comment on my issue. He claimed that he was not aware of any compounds that I had mentioned being used for, quote, geoengineering, which made me wonder, is he trying to hint that these compounds are being used for weather modification, which I did mention, because we've got presentation by Dr. Joe Golden. He's with the American Meteorological Association and the Royal Meteorological Association, and he's talking about how aerosols are used to manipulate hurricanes, and they can be used to cause floods and droughts as well. It's quite a find, actually, because here we have an insider talking about how important aerosols are as far as weather modification is concerned.
Well, even when you were talking about the scientist that you wrote to and he responded to you, I was listening to what you were saying, and what I didn't hear him say was that they weren't spraying. He denied measuring the aluminum and the strontium and the barium, but he did not say, oh, and I don't know what you're talking about spraying. We don't spray.
No, he replied he wasn't aware of any of the compounds I mentioned being used for, and he put in quote marks, geoengineering. Mm-hmm. But he didn't mention the weather modification that I had put in my email.
But he also didn't say, we're not spraying.
No, he didn't say that.
Okay,
no.
Well, I think that's important.
He was not aware of any of the compounds I mentioned being used for geoengineering, and he put geoengineering in quote marks.
Okay.
Yeah, he didn't refer to the weather modification that I referred to. So, and also I emailed another employee of NIWA. He's involved in air quality, and because sometimes the air gets so thick here with particulates, it becomes difficult to breathe in the days following. It seems this should be an issue for NIWA if they're involved in air quality measurements. But the chap that I emailed, he didn't bother responding. Something that I found interesting, there was quite a serious flood in Christchurch, that is New Zealand's second largest city, and it's in the South Island of New Zealand, on the 4th and 5th of March this year. There's evidence to show in the mainstream media that there's been this ability to create floods since at least the early 1950s. And so imagine the technology that they have now. In the days preceding the flood, I was sent the photographs of a lot of aerosol spraying going on, also ripples appearing in the cloud material, and the day before the flood, 25 kilometres away, very strange looking clouds, unnatural looking clouds. I mean, if you saw them, you think, oh, what the heck? It looked like something from a sci-fi comic. Interestingly, there was a story in the mainstream media here on the 23rd of March, which mentioned that NIWA is keen to study the relationship between climate change and extreme weather events, and they want the public's help. And they say all you need to do is provide your computer. And the story refers to the Christchurch flood, and it mentions that it's the goal of many scientists to find a link between such extreme weather events, which evidence showed, in my opinion, was engineered. And to find a link between such extreme weather events and so-called man-made climate change. In other words, to prove that it's a result of burning fossil fuels, excess carbon dioxide, and it's all our fault.
Yeah, of course. It has nothing to do with them spraying.
Yeah, exactly.
Unbelievable.
And yeah, and the story went on to suggest that the team will start modelling last year's weather, and that's when we had a severe drought in the North Island of New Zealand. And it said that they will start their modelling because that's when the drought was, as it may have been in a world without greenhouse gas emissions. And their models obviously are not based on reality. It's people who are going to be fiddling on computers, working for an organisation that won't acknowledge the massive amount of aerosol material being seen in our atmosphere and the evidence where the modification technology has been used. So, I mean, it's a foregone conclusion what they're going to find, Mike, isn't it?
Yeah, you know what it is? As you're speaking, Claire, I'm thinking to myself, this is a tried and true formula that they have, not just for the aerosol spraying and the geoengineering, but for just about everything that they do to push their agenda
Mm-hmm.
forward. It's a false flag. It's
Mm-hmm.
problem, reaction, solution. That's what it
Yeah.
is. It's
Yes.
the Hegelian dialectic. That's what they have in play. And the whole thing is just incredible. It's a crime against humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and it
Yeah.
has to be stopped.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a psyops, and the force behind the propaganda against the people of the US and New Zealand, Australia, and other Western nations. The world bankers, the transnational corporations, people involved in the Council on Foreign Relations, the Trilateral Commission, and the organisations they control. It's a little bit worrying that there are so many people that seem to be behind this and working towards it when it's documented that they have a goal to reduce the world population by about 85% and reduce survivors to pre-industrialized levels of consumption. And they're communo-fascists at heart, but they're not going to engage in a violent revolution, are they? They're very cunning. They're using propaganda, stealth, and highly sophisticated technology that the public, for the most part, has been kept in the dark about. So they're trying to convince everyone that the planet is doomed unless we make drastic changes via their massive brainwashing campaign. And it seems to tie in with what the Club of Rome people wrote in their publication, The First Global Revolution, which was in 1991. In searching for a new enemy to unite us, we came up with the idea that pollution, the threat of global warming, water shortages, famine, and the like would fit the bill. All these dangers are caused by human intervention. The real enemy then is humanity itself. And this is how they are working towards their one world government, convincing us that we are the enemy of the planet.
Absolutely. And as you're speaking again, I'm thinking to myself, it's what's really troubling is how subverted the government, our militaries are, our institutions are, academia. It's David versus Goliath. And it's just sometimes it's very troubling to me, Claire, when I take a step back because I'm like you. I just keep pushing ahead, trying to raise awareness. But every once in a while, you got to take a step back and you think to yourself, this conspiracy is so broad. It's so
Uh-huh.
deep. The rabbit hole is so deep that it really is extremely disconcerting.
Yes. Well, they've pushed so much money into this, haven't they? Like, for example, in the US, $4.7 billion a year into global warming research.
Right.
I mean, that's a massive sum. Imagine what could be done with that money if it was used to provide housing for the homeless.
The problem is how many people are just going along for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
This is the thing.
Yep.
These ideas are formulated, but in order for these ideas to get any traction, people have to put it in play. In other words, they have to execute the actions. They have to make
Yep.
it happen. And there's
Yep.
people that are rewarded by this system, this very wicked, evil system.
Yep.
They just don't blink. It's like they're on the outside looking in. This will have no effect on them, no effect on their families. And of course, I've done other radio shows where I've explained a big piece of this is because they have no empathy. They're psychopaths. There is a global awakening taking place. But again, as I talk to friends and family, I tell them, but we have to start picking up the rate and pace because, they're going full steam ahead, Claire. They're picking up their pace.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes,
Right?
I've noticed
Do you
that.
see that?
Yep.
I see that too.
Yep. Yep.
And you talked about, their agenda, and you talked about the CFR and the Trilateral Commission. Here in the United States, I don't know if you're aware, we have the Georgia Guidestones.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the Ten Commandments of the ruling class, the global elites. Interestingly enough, nobody really knows how the Georgia Guidestones got there. I always found that kind of interesting. Their first commandment, it's called the Ten Commandments of the globalists, maintain humanity under 500 million in perpetual balance with nature. Well, there's 7 billion people on the planet, which means 6.5 billion people must depart in order to achieve that goal.
Yeah, and given that this information is reasonably well known now, it seems quite odd that there are so many people that will still go forward and they'll still help with this agenda.
Right.
Like I know a teacher here, he's teaching high school students, and I gave him a copy of Why in the World Are They Spraying? He only watched part of it, and his partner told me that he wasn't going to address the matter with the children because, quote, he didn't want to rock the boat. And so he's continuing to talk about man-made global warming, carbon dioxide being a dangerous gas when we know it's essential to life on Earth. It's what plants use for photosynthesis.
Well, he's complicit and he's an enabler.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
He thinks his hands are clean. It's not his problem. It's not his issue to address. But we all have a responsibility as the caretakers of this planet.
Mm-hmm.
To,
exactly.
Right? That's what we are.
Yeah.
We are caretakers of this planet. We have a responsibility to take care of this planet. And people like that, I mean, I know this is going to be strong language, but they're cowards. Claire, I wrote down a couple of notes here with regard to my research and what I see as purposes for the spraying. So one would be to charge the atmosphere for military applications.
Yeah.
To test dispersal for biological agents, weather modification, weather warfare, and geoengineering. So when people talk to me about why are they doing this, my response is it's not really one single reason. That I do believe there is a multifaceted purpose for what they're doing and for why they're doing it. And I do believe it has a lot to do with military application. They have a mindset which is essentially saying that humanity is a large pool of guinea pigs. We're going to test these applications, and we're going to use humanity as our guinea pigs.
I think what they're doing now is so full on, full scale. I mean, if you have a look at the satellite imagery closely, you can see manipulating the weather on such a large scale. This can't be experimentation, Mike, in my opinion. What they're doing is deliberate. While we're being given the impression in the media that we've got this group of people who want to engage in geoengineering, it seems quite benign, spraying particles into the atmosphere to stop man-made global warming in the future. Nothing to worry about. Then, if you have a closer look at the people that have been involved in the geoengineering work, like, for example, Ken Caldera, an atmospheric scientist at Stanford, and he moved to Stanford in 2005 after 10 years at the Lawrence Livermore National Lab, which is the Cold War weapons facility. And while he was at that lab, he came under the influence of Lowell Wood, the legendary weaponeer nicknamed Dr. Evil. And interestingly, the military-grade nanothermite that was found throughout the dust after the attacks of 9/11 was traced back to the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. So we know that is a facility that is being used for the purposes of New World Order agendas. And actually, it's a bit disturbing how many scientists working on geoengineering have either worked or collaborated with the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. Among them, Edward Teller, father of the hydrogen bomb and architect of the Reagan-era Star Wars missile defense system. And he was actually the inspiration for that lunatic character that was quite happy to blow up the world that Stanley Kubrick called Dr. Strangelove. And Lowell Wood, Edward Teller's protege, I think I mentioned it, he said that they will engage in geoengineering inevitably at some stage. I think that while they're indicating in their public statements that it's to save the planet from man-made global warming, given the background of the Lawrence Livermore Lab, this is about a weapon that they're using. And I think that was brought into the public arena by Republican Congressman Dennis Kucinich when he defined chemtrails as an exotic weapon in a draft of HR 2977, the Space Preservation Act of 2001.
That's right. It was taken out. Dennis
Yeah,
Kucinich had put it in, and then in the final draft, chemtrails were pulled out of that whole section under exotic weapons.
really is a secretive program. But something that Lowell Wood said to the Rolling Stone magazine, I found it quite interesting, is that everything you need to know is out there if you know where to look. And then he said, well, virtually everything. But he's saying that if we want to find out what they're up to, the information is there. And there is actually a website, a government website related to aerosol trails associated with the Department of Energy in the United States. And when people say to me, chemtrails, that's just a conspiracy theory, you're a nutter, I direct them to this website, which I'll go and get the name for it.
Yeah, what you can do, Claire, if you have the name or if you can give it to me later, I'll add it to the show notes.
Yeah.
You know, the problem is, and I run into this, is the information is out there. There's no doubt about it. But there's so much information, and it's intentionally done this way. Tons of disinformation also.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to plow through all the lies and the deception to get to that grain of truth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the problem. The problem is that we can get to the truth, but it takes a very long time. Very long time, right? So while we're researching and we're trying to put the pieces of the puzzle together, just to take these little grains of truth and get them together to try to build a bigger picture out of it, they're off and running. So by the time we figure something out, they've implemented or well on their way toward implementing. And I picked up your point before. I believe you're right. I had said it's a grand experiment, and it sounded like what you were saying is, hey, Mike, it's beyond experimentation.
Yeah, because evidence shows that they've been using this technology for decades. They were using it in the 1940s. Yeah, there's an interview on the BBC website and related to a flood that was created in Ninmouth, UK. They interviewed people who were there at the time. There was someone who mentioned that they were doing work related to weather modification in the late 1940s. So imagine what they're able to do now with their new technology, their Star Wars weapons. And it might be worth mentioning that there does seem to be evidence that they're using advanced technology for spraying the chemtrails. I've seen pictures on the internet of what looks like a flying saucer.
Yeah.
And there's a skydiver in New Zealand called Graham Bull. He was, I think he was with the military. And when he was up at approximately 10,000 feet, he said, I can see on occasion these aircraft. He said, I don't want to say what I see, because if I do, I'll be put in a hospital. He said, aircraft without wings, spraying aerosol trails, he said, very rapidly. And this could be where a lot of the material that we're seeing in the atmosphere is coming from. It's not from the airplanes, it's from advanced technology that doesn't use oil, I'm guessing, which is highly ironic since they're telling us we need to stop using fossil fuels.
That's for us. The fossil fuels, that's put upon us in order to create scarcity. That's not what they're using.
No, and...
but, you know, Clay, you're on the point about like a saucer type of vehicle. I notice might sound crazy to folks that are listening to this, but I have a very, very good friend of sound mind who lives up in New York, and I remember him telling me about 9 months ago that in the New York area, Long Island in particular, that he was watching these trails being laid, and what he was seeing was craft without wings. I remember very vividly having that discussion with that person, and you know, what's the chances that I have somebody that I know and you have somebody that you know coming together and explaining the same exact phenomena?
Yeah.
You right?
Yeah. And I noticed there's a geoengineering cost analysis available on the web. I think it would have been commissioned by David Keith. It's got Keith in the web address. And it was by Aurora Flight Sciences. And it states on it was commissioned by the University of Calgary and dated July 2001. And in there, Aurora Flight Sciences provides a variety of different ideas for engaging in geoengineering. And like, for example, using 747s, airships, cannons, rockets for putting sulfur compounds into the atmosphere. One of the craft that they propose looks like a blimp. It was called, I think it was a hybrid vehicle. I think it might use helium, and it didn't look as if it had wings. And I showed it to Graham Bull and I said, could this be what you saw? And he said, no, this is not what I saw. It was moving far too fast, implying that this was far advanced. And so while the public sector is struggling away with these ideas, creating craft to try and get to the altitudes, like, for example, David Keith seems to want to have aerosol sprayed at 100,000 feet, and that's 30.5 kilometres approximately. There's not the conventional craft are unable to do it. It seems that the military-industrial complex, which is behind this weather engineering, does have the capability, if what Graham Bull and your friend are saying is correct, which I'm sure it is. I have no doubt in Graham's integrity.
To me, it's a no-brainer that the technology that they have is so far advanced. See, what they show us is just appeasement. It's just to keep us kind of occupied and in wonderment, if anybody is even paying attention. But it's just a sideshow. The technology that they have is just mind-boggling. The sooner people get their heads wrapped around the fact that this technology is available and that it's in use, and it's been in use for a long time, more pieces of the puzzle will come together.
Yeah, and Dr. Robert Bowman, he worked on the Star Wars program, I understand.
Yes.
And he told Alex Jones during an interview that the moon landing, he said, was faked. That was because they wanted to conceal the technology that they were using.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And people ask me about the moon landing because, I'm the guy with the tinfoil hat, and I tell them, I said, look, I'm not saying we didn't go to the moon. What I'm telling you is we didn't go to the moon with that technology. You were given a show. You were given a TV show. That's what you were given, right?
Yeah.
And I personally believe that wasn't the first time they went to the moon with their technology either. I believe they've been going there for a long time, and they just decided to put on a little show for us back in 1969.
Yeah, to justify all the funding that was going to
Exactly.
NASA.
Yep, exactly. What we can do is, do you have any more you wanted to add, or did you want to just talk to us about your website and how to contact you and stuff like that?
My website is called Northland New Zealand Chemtrails Watch, and you can find an email address at the top of the page there, chemtrailsnz@hotmail.com. And I've got a YouTube channel. It's called Web of Evidence, that's got about 60 videos on it now. And there's some quite interesting things to see there, including fibres that we see in association with a lot of particulate material being around, long reflective fibres, and also white spheres, a little bigger than tennis balls, floating around when the atmosphere seems to be particularly thick with particulates. So there's more evidence of the technology that they're using that the public isn't privy to. I recommend that people look at Clifford Carnicom's website, because he's a fastidious researcher, and watch aerosol crimes and why in the world are they spraying. I don't know what's happened with who in the world are they spraying. Mike, have you heard anything about that?
I haven't. That's the one that Michael Murphy was working on as the follow-up?
Yeah.
I
Yes.
have not heard any more about when that was coming out.
Yes. Yeah. It was supposed to be coming out at the end of last year, but I haven't heard anything about it being released, which is a little bit concerning.
Might have been a funding issue. I don't know. What I'll do is drop Michael an email and ask what's going on.
Yeah. And have you had Michael Murphy on yet, Mike?
I have not. I plan on having Michael on. I want to get Dane on also to get his perspectives. I want to get the geoengineering aspect out into the public. I want people to pay attention to this stuff because it's very, very important.
Yeah, but I think it's important to distinguish between geoengineering and the chemtrail issue.
Yes.
Which Kucinich he defined it as an exotic weapon, whereas geoengineering in the media, that's been defined as countering global warming or offsetting some of its effects.
I don't even refer to it as chemtrails anymore. I mean, we did
Yeah.
back and forth here in this discussion, but whenever I post something on Facebook or I put something on the blog, I refer to it as geoengineering aerosol spraying.
Yeah.
Because many people, as soon as they hear the word chemtrail, they tune out.
Yeah.
They just tune
Yeah.
out.
It's a very tricky situation, isn't it?
It is.
Because the geoengineering, it's been proposed to be done at a much higher altitude than the chemtrails that we see being sprayed. We see them at about 30,000 feet, 35, where the aircraft engaged in normal passenger flights are flying at.
Yeah,
I think,
commercial altitudes, 30, 40,000
yeah,
feet. They're saying above 40,000 feet for the geoengineering. Is that what you're saying?
yeah, well, in that Aurora Flight Sciences
Okay.
cost analysis, it mentioned one of the heights, the highest one proposed was 30.5 kilometres, which is about 100,000 feet. And jet aircraft will normally fly at about 30, 40,000 feet, which is about 9.
Right.
And which is where we're seeing a lot of the aerosols, which seems to be a lot lower level than the geoengineers talk about spraying the aerosols. So it does seem to be two separate things.
There's something going on. It's multifaceted, and
Yeah.
just hope we could figure it out in time before it becomes too late.
Let's hope that the public wakes up. Because
Exactly.
goodness. Yeah, because this has been used as part of their con game, their man-made global warming, creating extremes in weather and trying to win support for a one world government. And I think that politicians complain about the non-problem of increasing concentrations of carbon dioxide, and they ridicule the people who mention chemtrails. And it's because we don't help in their efforts towards a one world government, which is what it's really all about. Everything's marching towards the formation of a one world government. And
well, the politicians, they're all there. That's the puppet show. They're all there to run interference and run cover for everybody that's up above them. And most of the public believes that they're dealing with some congressman here in the United States, and the buck stops there, and they have power and authority. They're puppets. That's all they are. That's why nothing gets done, because nothing is supposed to get done with these people. Their job is not to get anything done. Their job is to bamboozle the public and keep them distracted and keep them off balance, argue, debate, all kinds of inane types of topics and arguments. In the meantime, the real agenda continues on, mostly unimpeded in many instances. Every once in a while they hit a hiccup where they run into some resistance, or maybe something didn't go as planned. But I'm not trying to be negative here for anybody who's listening. It's the reality of the situation. When you see the extent of what's going on and you see who is involved, somebody has to put these aircraft into play. Somebody has to put advanced technology into play. The people that are doing this, we're talking about very, very powerful people and powerful organizations that are able to do this. And that's why really humanity has a tough row to hoe. And the only way we're going to be able to defeat this is we have to, as you said, the public has to become aware, because we have got to reach that critical mass. We have to reach that. Now, I don't know what critical mass, what that number is. From my calculations, we're not there yet.
No, I think that I've noticed since the aerosol spraying has become so much more obvious, and you've seen it in the States as well, haven't you?
Oh, yeah.
It's a lot easier to wake people up now, isn't it? You can just point up and say, keep your eye on that trail, watch it spread out. It's not a vapor trail.
Claire, I would tell people, say, look, go outside at about 6, 7 o'clock and look up in the sky. Pretty much clear, right? Okay. At around 8:30, 9 o'clock, at least here, what'll happen is they start flying their routes. By noon, 1 o'clock, the sky is a whiteout. It's this milky white cloudiness hanging over us, with a hazy sun trying to break through.
Yeah, I think it's a medium for the use of directed energy weapons. You can see the ripples start forming after a while.
Yes.
Variably, yeah.
Yep, we see them all the time.
Manipulating the weather.
So anything else, Claire, you want to talk about? Because we got a lot of information and a lot of content.
I didn't mention, and perhaps I should have done, about John P. Holdren on March the 19th, because this is quite significant since it's coming from the White House. I'll just say it quickly. On March the 19th, White House Science Czar John P. Holdren was emphasising a supposed link between extreme weather events and climate change. Another one. it seems evident that because there's been no global warming for over 17 years and 6 months, as I mentioned, the politicians and others calling for action to halt climate change have shifted their focus to worries about extreme weather events. And in this press release that was on the White House website, it mentioned there's going to be a new climate data initiative which will link extreme weather events to climate change. So we can see, here's another motivation for creating these droughts, floods, and hurricanes. Yeah.
Well, there's no end, Claire, to the level of deception and the lies and the propaganda that they come up with. I mean, they have one objective, as you mentioned before. They want to push their New World Order forward. They want to implement that. They want global government. And so they will continue to come out and try to tie these things together and try to leverage the fact that most people don't know anything about what they're talking about and will take their lies at face value. And this, of course, is part of the problem. And this is what you and I are trying to do. We are trying to get people to wake up and understand that they are being lied to. And they need to start doing something about that. So, Claire, we have reached the end of our show, unfortunately. This was a fantastic discussion, and I really, really want to thank you for coming on and talking about this, because geoengineering is a very, very important topic, and everybody needs to know about it.
Oh, thank you.
And that concludes our discussion with Clare Swinney. I hope you enjoyed the talk as much as I did. And if there's one takeaway from the show, I would like everyone to look up, because you are being sprayed, and to be vocal and to get involved. And I would like to thank everyone for listening and for visiting the blog, sageofquay.com. And please visit my other website, laboroflovemusic.com, to take a listen to my CD, Leaving Dystopia. And remember to live in truth and always serve creation. It's really that simple. See everyone next week. Be safe, enjoy, and God bless.